Volker, Peyton Utek, Taylor Reichelt, and Alex Poland, we were assisted by a number of dedicated faculty and staff at DW to make this event possible. It is our honor to help facilitate this incredibly important conversation on our campus tonight.
Hello everyone, I'm Joel Reinisch, Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice here at Dakota Wesleyan University. Welcome back for our second portion of our event this evening, which is going to be the panel discussion. Joining Angela on our panel are three individuals from different backgrounds related to the issue of opioids. Each, along with Angela, brings a unique perspective to the issue, and Dakota Wesleyan is honored to have them as part of our panel discussion this evening. Emma and I will ask a number of questions to start the panel discussion, after which we will open the floor to you, the audience, and we encourage you to ask any questions that you have for anybody in the panel. Again, we will have microphones going through the audience. Just raise your hand and we will find you, okay? Members of our panel this evening are Dr. Matthew Stanley. Dr. Stanley is the Vice President for Behavioral Health Clinical Service Line across the Avera system, and Medical Director of Avera Behavioral Health Services in both Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Marshall, Minnesota. He has practiced psychiatry with Avera since 1996 and has held positions on numerous local and state boards and committees in the fields of psychiatry, including serving as the President of the South Dakota State Psychiatric Medical Association. He is an assistant professor for the Department of Psychiatry at the University of South Dakota, Sanford School of Medicine, and has served as a principal and sub-investigator in a number of research studies. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Matthew Stanley.
Well, I want to take just a moment to thank you all for having us here today, and I welcome the opportunity to talk in front of a group like this. I tell you, I've gotten to know Angela over the last several months, and we have seen the power of her talking about her own story and her family's story, and you, I'm sure, were moved just like I was to hear that story. And what I love about Angela is she's opened up the conversation now for all of us. We were talking before this presentation today and talking about some other crises that have occurred in healthcare, and Angela mentioned the HIV/AIDS epidemic and all the efforts that went into that and all the lives that were lost. But we now have open dialogue about that, and we have treatments that are effective, and we are saving lives. And I don't know if we can draw direct parallels, but I do know that we have to have events like this and discussions like this to open up opportunities to develop better plans for treatment, to reduce stigma, to encourage people to seek help and to get care. And so again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to this evening's discussion.
We've already met Angela this evening. Next to Angela is Joel Vandover. Joel's been one of the most prominent voices in Mitchell radio for the past 30 years, working for KMIT here in Mitchell. Throughout his time in Mitchell, Joel has proudly worked with and started a number of charitable events in the city of Mitchell. Joel has battled prescription opioid addiction for approximately 15 years and has been sober now for a number of years. He is a survivor. A father of two with two grandchildren, tonight is the first time that Joel is going to publicly speak about his addiction. Please welcome Joel Vandover.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel. Thank you very much. I am here for one reason. It's the beautiful lady in the blue dress. I have seen what she's been doing, and it made me come out of my shell a little more. What happens is, when you go through something like this, bottom line, you don't want anybody to know. And it's, even after getting better, I'm slowly getting okay with being out in public and saying, yeah, I went through that. But it's her bravery, talking about her daughter, and the sincerity of making sure that people get help that is so badly needed, and she's doing a good job getting the word out. And I'm happy to be with her tonight and this great panel.
Joel called me shortly after he agreed to do this, and he said, I agreed to do this because you spoke out. And I just thought, if just that one person did that, then everything I've done will have been worth it. So thank you, Joel. Really appreciate it.
Our final panelist this evening is Chief Lyndon Overweg. Chief Overweg currently serves as the Chief of the Department of Public Safety for the City of Mitchell. He was born and raised in New Holland, is a graduate of Dakota Christian and Dakota Wesleyan University. Chief Overweg has been employed with the Mitchell PD his entire law enforcement career starting in 1988. He's held the ranks of patrolman, detective, detective sergeant, assistant police chief, and now his current role as the Chief of Public Safety, which he has held since 2006. Married with 4 children and 2 grandchildren, Chief Overweg also has served as the president of the South Dakota Police Chiefs Association, president of the LifeQuest Board of Directors, and also recently served on the State Council for Juvenile Services, and currently is the commissioner for the State Council on Interstate Commission for Juvenile Services. Chief Lyndon Overweg.
Joel, thank you, and I'd like to commend Dakota Wesleyan and the City of Mitchell for coming together as a community for an event like this. I would challenge other communities. To do this. For the panelists that are up here, I commend you for doing this. Hopefully this makes a difference. The opioid epidemic is a substantial problem in America. We've seen it increase substantially every year since like 2000. That's when it kind of really took off. The disappointing thing, it is increasing every year, and we're continuing to see it touch communities across America. We've seen it in Mitchell. We've had deaths in Mitchell. We've seen it in small communities around here that have had the same thing. One of the things I'll touch on, overdose from opioids in South Dakota in 2015 was 18 for the whole state. In 2015, it was 18 for the whole state. Last year, there was 149 in South Dakota. So I think we as a community and as a nation can get this solved. We've tackled great problems before, but it's going to take a lot because right now we don't have all the answers. So, but thank you all.
All right, we're going to start the panel off with a question for Dr. Stanley. What exactly is an opioid, and how does it differ from other drugs more commonly associated with addiction, such as marijuana, methamphetamine, alcohol, cocaine?
And so opioids are drugs that work directly on opioid receptors in our brains, and there are specific opioid receptors. The most commonly impacted is the mu opioid receptor, and the effect of opioids is to alleviate pain. There are natural opioids, primarily derived from poppies. But I think what we're talking about when we talk about the increased risk of death in the United States and locally in this region are the synthetic opioids that have now been produced. And that's one of the areas where we really get into the big difference, I think, between opioid abuse and our current epidemic and the lives, as the Chief was just talking about, the lives lost, because the synthetic opioids that are now being produced, which are unfortunately mixed in the community with normal drugs of abuse or drugs of abuse that people aren't aware they're being adulterated with. As Angela said, it's really crossed all boundaries, but more often the synthetic opioids are mixed in with the heroin or even with cocaine that people are taking. And just to give you an idea, Angela described the potency of the dose that was found in her daughter after her overdose. But these synthetic opioids are so powerful, they were actually considered at one time to be a potential weapon of mass destruction. They could be aerosolized. They can be essentially 100 times more powerful than a fentanyl drug that might be used by an anesthesiologist to help you put to sleep. So essentially just touching your skin can render you unconscious and really eliminate your respiratory drive, your ability to continue to breathe. And the problem is in these overdoses, unless someone is right there and has a drug that's capable of reversing this at that mu opioid receptor, the Narcan, that's now carried by our first responders all over the country, it's immediate and irreversible death. So when we talk about overdose, and I want people to understand that these are not intentional overdose like we often talk about in cases of suicide. These are people, unfortunately, getting a hold of a drug that's been adulterated. So they may understand they're using a substance. They just do not understand that they have picked up something that has an incredible potency to it. So these are not intentional overdoses. And that's why they're also being increasingly pursued as criminal acts, because it is a death sentence to inject one of these drugs. So, you know, almost all of drugs of abuse work on our dopamine, which is it is our major reward circuit in our brain. And as Angela's video identified, you know, dopamine was built into us probably evolutionary to drive things like eating and sex. But to give you an example of how much more powerful these drugs are, nominal rate of dopamine increase from eating is about 150% baseline. Sexual activity about 200%. Methamphetamine 1,000%. It's 5 times better than sex. I don't know how much more powerful I can tell you some of these drugs are, and that's. I was wondering if anybody else there. I wasn't sure. This is a college campus, right? So I assumed that there were a few people that. But no, in all seriousness, so these are circuits that are built into our brain very purposefully, very powerfully to be reward circuits to drive behavior. And the problem, as the video said, is these drugs hijack that system and drive you to continue using. I'll say one other thing and then I'll stop, about the difference between, I think, opioids as a drug of abuse and most others. When you talk to opioid users, oftentimes they'll say, yeah, the first couple of times I felt phenomenal, it was sensational. But not long after that, it wasn't that I felt good. I kept using the drug because I couldn't stand how I felt without it. They were no longer driven by a high, a euphoria. They were driven by a desire to avoid how terrible they felt without it. That is really a desperate and sad story to think about. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley. The next question is for Chief Overweg. How have opioids impacted the law enforcement community locally?
I think some of the things that it brought forward, not only locally, but nationwide, you just talked on the fentanyl itself. We hadn't dealt with that much before. You know, we do have Narcan now. If we go out and do a search warrant, especially if we know it's going to be a possible fentanyl or anything like that, we carry the Narcan, but it's not just for the offenders. We're doing it for our officers who may get an exposure. That's very real, and it's happening across the country right now. And some of them are getting potential life-threatening exposures simply off the dust of this stuff. So that's some of the adjustments we've made. The challenges with opioid is it's multifaceted. So you got the illegal street drugs that you don't know the potency of, and you also have the prescription drugs that are out there that people are obtaining, appears to be in a legal manner. Some of them are doctor shopping to where they're going from state to state. Challenges, and they're going to different doctors for the same symptoms, and that's illegal. And unfortunately, we do not have a national database yet. Right now, South Dakota has a database that they are joined with 22 states. Unfortunately, there's 50 states in America. So if you pick the other states, you can just keep bouncing around from these emergency rooms or doctors. I think we have to have it as a goal that this database has to be all 50 states. and that all doctors and all pharmacies are registered and entering into this this database. But them are some of the challenges without taking up a bunch more time, but there's dangers that we hadn't seen before. And the people using these, I mean, they're not spazzed out people like we see with meth. When we get in their houses, they're usually slumped over. If they're on a high, they're just relaxed, or they might be out on a bed in a corner or whatever. But like you talked about, Doctor, it's when they don't have it. The things they'll do to get another fix of this, they'll do anything to get that. Just the bad feeling they have unless they're high. So there you go.
And from your perspective, who is most affected by the opioid crisis?
Oh man, we have seen this from all classes of people. But if you look at statistics in South Dakota, it's usually 25 to 45 years old. That's the majority of overdoses. But we see it from all classes, but the majority would fall within that 25 to 45-year-old range.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
It has risen, lowered the life expectancy in this country. The opioid epidemic, 72,000 people died in 2017. 2017, yeah. That's 194 a day. If you add alcohol-related deaths into that, that's 400 people that die a day from substance use disorder. If a jetliner was going down in this country with 400 people every day, what would we be doing? Also, it has the number of women, middle-aged, they call, I guess I'm really over the hill, I think it was like 25 or 36 or something to like 60, but the number of women who have died has increased 260%. 260%.
The last statistic I'll bring up, every 11 minutes somebody is dying from an opioid overdose. I think it's 8 now. 8? 8 minutes, okay? Yeah, that's all right. I mean, that's why I said the statistics are continuing to rise. No, it's not.
I have another question for you, Chief Overweg. How common is opioid abuse in the Mitchell area and surrounding areas?
Right now, we have not seen a lot of it, okay? In 2017, we did have a very large case where there was a fentanyl distribution ring going on. It involved tens of thousands of pills. The strange thing was he was not selling it much in Mitchell. He was going to Watertown, Huron, Brookings, Sioux Falls, a lot of surrounding towns. That was a federal case, and I believe he got like 15 or 17 years. But since then, I was asking our guys today, I don't know if we've had a fentanyl case since that one, almost a year, okay? We do see some prescription opioid cases, and we see very little heroin in Mitchell, but we know it's very close. It's here. Occasionally people will talk about it to actually get it here. We're not seeing that much, but we know it's close, and there's a good chance it's coming.
Thank you. Joel, can you tell us your story of addiction? Please.
How much time do you have?
As much as you need.
I was addicted to prescription opiates, and it started out with very well-intentioned, excellent doctors. I had really, really bad knees. I mean, they were bad. And unfortunately for me, I made the mistake because I got to thinking, as you mentioned, Chief, and also the doctor mentioned it, it wasn't because I wanted to keep taking them. I just got tired. I was so sick when I stopped taking them that I decided, okay, well, all these people are saying if you go here, you go here. And, you know, as a working professional, you know there's something wrong with that. But I did. That's what I did. I went, I didn't leave the state or anything like that, but I found out where the pills were, and I went and got them. And if I would have walked in and told my doctor, who was here tonight, a great friend of mine, if I would have told him my struggles, he would have been the first one to help me. But as Angela mentioned, there's a stigma that goes with this, and it's almost like a defeat. It's like the best way I can describe it is this is winning over me, and society will never understand. So, yeah, I can manage it. I'll manage it, I'll make it work, until at the end, there's no managing anything. I mean, the amount that you have to use or take a day just to feel normal, in my case, was absurd. And so that's pretty much my story. And I think it's the story of a lot of people. One thing I would like to say is on the doctors' behalves, my doctors early on were treating me, monitoring everything. They kept an eye on things, and they had no clue. I never told them. I never told them, hey, I get sick when I don't take these, so I go here. And they can't help you at that point. But if the stigma goes away, most doctors are ready to help you. And had I not left mine, I wouldn't have had to go through about 10 years of grief. So that's the story kind of in a nutshell.
Angela, I have a question for you. I've heard you speak about this in the past, but I don't think we touched on it tonight. We did talk about in your intro, you talked about there's 4 people who are currently facing charges for the drugs that ultimately caused Emily's death. I guess what is your feeling towards them? I mean, are you looking for retribution there? Do you feel otherwise? I mean, as a mother, you have every right to be incredibly upset, but what are your thoughts regarding those individuals?
There are 4 people charged related to Emily's heroin fentanyl overdose case. One of those is the guy that was, he took over the route from Chicago to Sioux Falls for another guy who's also charged. So there's 2 separate rings of 4 people that are currently making their way through the federal court system. So that guy took over the route. His last name is Phillips. And this guy named Devlin Tamarison got the drugs from Phillips, and then he sold them to Emily and a guy that she was with. And he was found passed out in Hy-Vee the very same day that Emily died of an overdose. He lived because he was in a public place. Nothing that happens to these men is going to bring my daughter back, and I know that. I feel like Tamarison is just as sick as Emily was. I think all of these users will sell to each other. If they get some, they'll sell it to their friends and the people they know. Tamarison has another chance. I don't know that federal prison is the place for people to recover from substance use disorder, but that he's pled guilty. I write about it in my blog, which can be found on the Emily's Hope website. It's a difficult thing. These are human beings as well. So I struggle. I guess I'm not a vindictive person. I wish I could get to the source of who put the fentanyl in the drug. I tried to ask prosecutors that, but they don't know the answer to that question. It comes from somewhere in Chicago. It came off the boat from China. Those nameless, faceless people will probably never be held accountable.
What would you like to see happen to them? Are we talking prison? What do you think needs to happen with them?
Well, this Tamarison has pled guilty, so he'll be sentenced to a minimum of 20 years because he's been pled guilty to distributing. There's new classes of charges handed down by the federal government. There's mandatory minimums. I do hope that the prison systems come up with some really good ways to treat people. I have to write a victim impact statement and speak in court in a couple of weeks. I mean, I try to explain to you people the impact of losing my daughter. I don't think I can really get it across. Not really, unless you can climb into my skin and into my heart. So I've been putting that off, writing that statement, but I'll be doing it. And the other guy, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they just seem kind of, the guys that were bringing in from Chicago, it's their business, right? They're just out to make a buck. They don't care who dies. They don't care. And I did ask, right away, I asked detectives, I said, why in the world would the dealers want to kill their customers? That doesn't make any sense to me. And they told me they don't care because the line is out the door. And in fact, when a few people die, that's really good stuff. I won't use the other word that they said, but that's what they said. And it's shocking, but it's true. It's true. It's a good form of advertisement for them, too.
Dr. Stanley, what types of specific medical treatments are available for people in the midst of an opioid addiction?
Well, I think that's an important question to ask, because I think one of the reasons we're struggling so much with this opioid epidemic, this opioid crisis, because I don't know if we were prepared for this kind of an episode in the United States. We have struggled with addiction across the United States. It's one of our, as Angela was pointing out earlier, you know, it affects our young. It's one of our most destructive events in the United States between suicide and substance use. You know, these are the prime killers of everyone from age 14 to about 26. Motor vehicle accidents would be the only other one that rates up that high. But we just haven't had a very profound response to something that's taken our future away from us. But I think what's most confusing or most problematic about the opioid epidemic is what we've just been talking about on this panel today, is on the streets now, there are synthetic opioids that are so powerful, they will kill you with one ingestion. You have no idea when you're getting a hold of those. And so every time you have a relapse, you're playing Russian roulette with your life if you go out and buy something off the street. So in the United States, we think of addiction treatment as abstinence. We go through abstinence programs, we use peer support programs, and all those can still be effective in opioid treatment. But the problem is, whether you're talking about alcohol or even meth, just about any drug, very few people have a smooth recovery where they never have a relapse event throughout that period of recovery. If you think about, though, every time you have a relapse with opioids, you're putting yourself at risk for death. Now we have a very dangerous situation. So I think one of the things that's different with the opioid crisis is the use of medications to assist in treatment from the very first day you begin to try to get off of your opioids. And there's two primary forms of treatment. We call them medication-assisted treatment, MAT. And the primary one is buprenorphine. So it's an analog or a synthetic form of opioid, and it's typically mixed with naloxone so that it can't be crushed and injected or snorted, because once you crush it or snort it, that drug becomes active, and we talked about naloxone earlier as a drug that blocks the receptor, so the high doesn't occur, the drug becomes ineffective if you misuse it in that way. And it's a controlled drug that's prescribed by physicians that have a specific ex-DEA license, so they've had to have additional training. So what we do is we try to maintain patients on these synthetic drugs. Methadone is actually another drug that can be used, and you can recall from the 70s when the methadone clinics began with the heroin epidemic we had at that time. So there's buprenorphine and there's methadone, and then there's long-acting naltrexone injections, which would go in and 30 days at a time per injection block that opioid receptor so that even if you take something, you really feel no impact to it. So I think this is where medicine, and we didn't really talk about the fact that I view these illnesses, these addictions, as medical diseases, but this is where medicine and our historical kind of approach to addiction, I think, are moving forward. We just have a long way to go to effectively treat a crisis like we're currently facing.
And just to follow up, have medical studies been able to explain why some people can get addicted to opiates or other drugs so easily?
Yeah, there's some interesting research out there. So we don't have any definitive tests so that I could bring you into my office and give you a test to ascertain whether or not you're at risk for drugs. But there are some interesting studies out there. As an example, one that was done with stimulants actually, and it looked at your affinity for how much dopamine transporter you had genetically been given, by your parents. And essentially, it turned out just as you might suspect. The lower level of dopamine transporter you had through what you were gifted genetically, so the harder it was for you to move dopamine, they gave you a test run of this methylphenidate. This is a stimulant. Those that had a lot of transporter really reported, yeah, that wasn't really enjoyable. I didn't like it. It made me feel weird. Those that had small amounts, yeah, I feel great. I had incredible energy. It was a real lift. So that's not opioids, but it gives you insight into how your brain, your kind of genetic makeup, and the neurochemistry the environment of neurochemistry that your brain is operating in can make you far more susceptible to some drugs than others, and far more susceptible than the person next to you. And there's a lot of data, but there's also issues like priming the pump. Angela spoke about the fact that if your first use of illicit drug is before the age of 13, your risk of developing a substance disorder is over 70% in your lifetime. Incredibly high. If your first use of illicit drug is after the age of 17, it drops to about 29%. What an incredible swing. So there is something as well, though, about priming the developing brain. So there are factors that put you at greater risk. Family history is another incredible indicator. I've warned my children up and down because my father was an alcoholic. I know we're at risk. So one of the best statements I can tell you, one of the best, anecdotes was one I heard from a very highly esteemed geneticist that was out of New Hampshire. He said, next time you drive by an addict, don't say shame on him, say, there but for the grace of God go I. Because your genetics, the environment you were raised on, how soon you were exposed to a drug, all those things factor into your ultimate risk of becoming addicted to a substance.
I have one more for you, sorry. What can doctors prescribe other than opioids?
I'm getting all the fun up here. Yeah, so this has been part of the difficulty. So pain, actually, if you look at the reasons people go to see their primary care physician, the predominant reason is for pain. And I won't kind of go into the history of how opioids became so prevalent in the United States, but there was also really the push to say that pain is the fifth vital sign. You're not doing your job as a physician if you don't treat pain. The problem is there aren't a lot of medications that effectively treat pain, and opioids became highly prescribed. I would say at this point, we recognize that not only is the dose of opioids a risk factor, so the higher, the more powerful I use, and also the longer I keep you on it, both those are factors in potentially making you addicted. So opioids are still used in pain control, but we are trying to control both the dose and the duration, so they can still be used safely. Otherwise, we do have the non-steroidals, the acetaminophen, drugs that you've used before. I think we as a population, myself included, when I'm a patient, and I think it's what Joel was talking about too, we have to kind of temper our expectations in terms of complete and total pain relief. There's just very few drugs that are going to do that. So really, we have to look at shorter duration, less potent drugs, use things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and then physical therapy. But these are things that aren't going to be immediate relief. And I think we also have to change. One of the more important things, I think, is we as physicians and we as patients have to change our expectation of how pain is going to be treated, and then we'll all kind of move forward.
One of the things that the Opioid Crisis Relief Act requires that was passed in October is that the drug companies come up with alternative treatments. So they're actually requiring the same makers of opioids to come up with alternative treatments as well. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Joel Vandover, sorry. How many attempts at rehabilitation have you made, and can you explain those processes?
How many attempts?
Yes.
I've gone to rehab 2 different times. Both times were strictly because of my family and friends. And what they had to endure to get me there was pretty amazing, because I didn't have a problem. I told them that probably a couple thousand times, but my family got me there. And the first time around, I went to a 1-month rehab facility, and that was the first time in, again, I'll just throw out a general number, first time in 15 years that I hadn't been on opiates. So for the first 2 weeks of rehab, I was comprehending a fraction of what was coming into me. It's embarrassing to admit it now, but I have to if I'm going to stay better. I couldn't write in my book. I couldn't read my writing. My hands were shaking, and that's with, I believe it's called Subutex, doctor. So that was one of the pills they were giving me so you didn't get so sick. But it took 2 weeks to start retaining the information because my brain had never been there. You know, I hope it'd been there at one time or another, but it has been there for about 15 years. And then I relapsed, and that was the time that I definitely wasn't going to tell anybody. There's no way I was going to let anybody know that I've done. Huh? Yes, I was. I was embarrassed. I felt like a failure. I didn't want to let people down, but here I was back there with what almost killed me. And I was dancing with it every day. And I took so much in a couple-day period, I don't know why I'm here. They always say that when you relapse, you're going to go back to wherever you left off, and it's probably going to double in a hurry. And that's what happened to me. Luckily, the second treatment that I went to was a 30-day treatment, scheduled to be 30 days, and my counselors, who I have the greatest respect for now, I stay in contact with 2 of them, they said, well, 30 days were up, they were telling me I was doing good. I said, okay, well, I got to get back to work. And they said, well, you can go ahead and go back to work, but we don't like your odds. And I'm going, what? You know, seriously, they put it that blunt. And so basically, their reasoning behind that is I had already relapsed after a 30-day treatment, and they see that pattern over and over. 30 days for many people isn't enough. So I stayed for 2 more months. Certainly a luxury I wouldn't have been afforded without good insurance and, without a supportive workplace. There's no way I would have been able to stay away that long. And the whole 60 days, the extra 2 months was relapse prevention. It was up in Aberdeen. And that's where they teach you the basics of, okay, get ready, because when you leave here, it may be a week, it may be a month, it may be 2 years, but those things are going to pop in your head again. And they do. That's what people don't understand is like, for me, I can have the best day, and in fact, luckily I've learned how to deal with this, but I can have the best day and be driving home from work with nothing bad happen, and all of a sudden you know what'd be good right now? A few of those opiates, and I won't say them by name, but you name them, I did them. And you have to know how to deal with that when it hits. And that's all they taught me for 2 months. It was the most valuable lesson I learned in recovery. If they would have kept me there 30 days, you can never really tell for sure. But I know the way I felt after 30 and the way I felt after 90 After 90 days, I was ready to come home and had confidence. I didn't necessarily after 30.
Yeah, Joel, just a couple of comments. So the Subutex you mentioned is a trade name of that buprenorphine we were talking about. And I also want to tell you that what you were experiencing is exactly the power of addictions. And as the video that we saw about the hijacking of the brain, the prefrontal cortex it referred to is all of our decision-making capacity. It's our executive functioning. And exactly what you described, even when you're aware that you have a problem, your judgment on that is impaired. And just a real easy, I think, analogy for all of us, if you have ever made a bad decision based on an emotion, based on a relationship or a purchase or anything, just because emotion drove you, think of that and power it up by about 10, because where these drugs are active are down in our amygdala, and it showed in the areas of our emotion, but those are hardwired to our prefrontal cortex. So even when we're aware, our brain is fighting our ability to go and try to get sober. The addiction is literally fighting you for control of your brain. And it's very hard to overcome, and that's why it takes family and it takes support.
Jay, I have a follow-up for you. You said that you can have the best day and you'll be driving home and just out of the blue it'll pop in your mind, and you talk about having to have that coping mechanism, that you have to go, somewhere else with your mind. What is it for you? What works for you?
It kind of varies. Through Narcotics Anonymous and AA, there's a number of resources. But the one thing that saves me, if I get to that point, is getting to a meeting, because you get outside of your own head, an AA or an NA meeting, or talking to a friend that's in recovery. Also, I do readings. On the spiritual side of the thing, when I got back from treatment, I was praying out loud, walking down the halls that, hey, I don't want to do any of these today. Help me, God, And I say to this day that all saved my life. So it's a combination of those things. And then all the stuff that I do is nothing that I created. It was all taught to me at rehab centers, and it was really taught to me on the human level at these AA and NA meetings. And they were saying, I did 90 meetings in 90 days. They were saying that's one of the things that they think works out for people. And of course, if that worked for everybody else, it wasn't for me. So it took me a long time to get there. But while I was in Aberdeen, I did the 90 meeting and 90-day thing. And I found out what a difference it makes in how you think about drugs and how you think about their effect on you, and the fact that you are strong enough to not let them beat you down again.
Okay, I can't help but be a reporter. I always have a lot of questions myself. And I was hoping, Dr. Stanley, you could explain how it takes 13 months or so for the brain that's been affected by opioids or meth to return on those scans. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, so what you're referring to, Angela, is the PET scans where we can see the changes. So real briefly, just to explain what a PET scan does. So you can label kind of radioactively like a sugar or another molecule, but and inject it into someone's system, and then you can monitor how the brain reacts to an activity or an action. You can actually, through that, really tell in the brain where action or metabolism is occurring. And you see the brain after cocaine use or substance abuse, and we see these areas, the prefrontal cortex, that are, the color washes out, the activity goes down, and actually kind of across the whole brain, other than where we see in some of the areas we were talking about, like the amygdala, where the drug actually acts. And then, so you can see someone in the throes of addiction, and you can see how much the brain's changed, and you can just, it's like, and here's where I would say, if you struggle with the idea that these are medical illnesses, it's just like doing a PET scan of a damaged heart after an MI. You put it in there, you can see the healthy heart, you still see it light up, it's still active. The area where the myocardial infarction occurred doesn't light up anymore, the metabolism is not there. Same way with the brain. So we have, researchers have followed this over time, and it is literally a year or more to see the color come back. So when we talk about recovery, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you're only beginning to touch the surface of the brain's actual recovery of somewhat normal function. And the problem is that dopamine, again, is the drug that our brain craves, and that's what our substances of abuse increase. There's nothing else that can do it to that power. So you're fighting this biological drive within you to try to lift that up, to feel like that again. I want to tell you what I thought was a really poignant story. Several months ago, I was out after breakfast with a friend of mine who's a 20-year recovering addict, a very successful gentleman, very much gives sponsoring and mentoring others. We were talking about what it takes to recover and what we hope to do with chemical dependency in this state and in these communities. And there was just a point there where he just kind of slumped, and again, this is a guy 20 years in recovery, and he said, "Matt, I'm just tired of being an addict every day of my life, because it is what you described. It's every day you're going to have a battle, and every day you have to wake up ready to win it. And as you said, when you relapse, it's not like the whole process starts over. You go right back to as bad as you were when you began recovery." So we really have to re-image these illnesses as medical diseases that are chronic and require a chronic approach to care.
Angela, I have a question for you. We had kind of spoke before this evening, and you were talking about, from your perspective as a newscaster, as a news person who tells the news, that you have to compartmentalize, all these terrible stories that you cover, these scenes that you go to, the things that you see. I know that I can speak throughout my law enforcement career, I'm sure the chief can as well too, that as our careers evolved, so did our thinking on addiction and how to treat those things. Those also evolved. I wonder, did your thinking evolve after your own personal tragedy from what you had personally thought leading up to that from your...
Well, I would say that I'm pretty informed, and so I've done a lot of stories and things like that, but I think until it happened to me, I think that's the case for everybody, right? So until something happens to you, you can't really truly understand it. And I understand it much better now. I think because of the tremendous love I have for my daughter, I will always have for my daughter, that I do believe, I know who she was, and so I know that this was not her, No addict ever chooses to be an addict. Why would anybody choose that? You destroy your potential as a human being. So yes, I think I've always think I've been an empathic and compassionate person, which makes me a successful interviewer. But I think I have much less judgment now as well. And you may wonder why I'm able to talk about it without breaking down. Obviously, I feel really bad. But 30 years of newscasting, 30 years of telling stories, and I've covered some of the worst things, and I've interviewed parents who've lost children, and I've learned, I guess I've had the training to be able to do this too. That's the other thing. And I have my moments, but they're when I'm alone, not with all you people. So.
My next question is for Chief Overweg. What steps are law enforcement taking to combat the opioid crisis? Also, are there any changes you would like to see made on the criminal justice side of the issue?
Some of the steps we've taken, we talked about the Narcan a little bit here. And one thing you have to know as family members, there's a law out there that allows a family member, here's what it says, a person who's a family member, friend, or other close third party to a person at risk of opioid-related drug overdoses may be prescribed Narcan. So if you have a family member, if you have a neighbor, anything like that, that you're close and you think there's a chance they could overdose, I would challenge you to get at least the Narcan in your house. It's just a nasal compression thing, very easy to administer. But when they stop breathing, that's the only thing out there, unless you're going to start CPR or something like that. But that's available in South Dakota. One of the other things is there's drop boxes at the police department, at all the area sheriff's departments. And what I say is a drop box, it's a place where you can bring your used prescription pills that are not used up. We see this time and time again where people have these hydrocodone, whatever, opioids in their cupboards. They have a social at their house, somebody uses the bathroom, they empty almost all of the pills out of it and they take them home and use them, or their kids get them and they sell them, or you have a garage sale. Somebody asks you, can I use your restroom? They go in, they clean out your medicine cabinet, they may take all of it, they may not take all of it, but if you have them that your injury is past, get rid of them, get them out of your house. You can bring them to these agencies, no questions asked. You can dump what, if you've had a family member that is deceased that had a whole bunch of pills, bring them in, get rid of them, get them out of your house. These have a tendency to recirculate in society, okay? You also talked about, is there any changes we'd like to see on the criminal justice side? I think the minimum mandatory sentences for the drug dealers, I don't have a lot of sympathy for these people that are doing this and for the big dealers that are in it for the money. For the people that are addicted, they are normal people that are battling an addiction. I have more sympathy for that than somebody that's out there trying to make a buck and don't care one bit about what happens, okay? The people that are out there that are addicted to it, they're no different than any of you sitting right here. They're normal, law-abiding citizens most of the time. They're not career criminals. They're somebody that has an addiction that needs help, and that's the way we have to focus on. Joel, you and I talked about it a while back. I said, how long do you think a sentence would be if we'd create a recovery town, not like a prison, but you'd be sentenced there for a year where you couldn't leave, and it was just a recovery town where you'd have treatment, that sort of thing. But we thought maybe 9 months to a year would be minimum. And that's an option down the road. I don't know where we'd do it or where we'd get the money, but those types of solutions have to be looked at, I think, rather than just kicking people back right into their environment and expecting them to change. These drugs are so powerful, they can't make logical decisions to get out of it. So them are some of the things I would challenge our communities with.
Thank you. Our last question before we open it up to the public is for Joel. What advice do you have for those in attendance today who are currently struggling with addiction?
I would say, I'm trying to remember how I felt, and it was such a roller coaster, so it's hard to go right to the point on this, but if you're struggling with an addiction, you're one of millions, in my opinion, and I think that number is going to keep going up until something drastically changes with the epidemic. And also that you deserve to feel human, and you can get better. But the number one thing is the only way you can get there, and one of my friends in recovery says this at all of our meetings, well, at least I'm honest now. You learn how to be honest, you can fix the problem. Because most addicts that are still addicts and using today still go through that shame process. I am not going to let anybody know that I went through hell last night. I'm not going there. I'm not going to tell anybody that. But if you do share openly, you'll find that the doors are starting to open. I can't believe the way people that had lost their faith in me and just pretty much thought that was going to be my life. I was going to be a partier and I was going to do whatever I wanted. I can't believe how quick many of those people came back into my life. But they had to see the changes. Addicts that are still struggling have a tendency to tell you whatever you want to hear. I was one of them. But through actions and getting better, you can get many of the things that you think are gone forever in your life, you can get them back. I've heard so many stories of financial success, traveling around the world. Guy always wanted a motorcycle, and when he went into rehab, he didn't have a dollar to his name, and now he goes around the United States in his motorcycle. Those stories are all over, you know. So you deserve that life that you hear about, or the one that appeals to you outside of drug use. And if it's opiates, please get help as soon as possible, because you've heard everybody up here talk about it. The doctor mentioned it, what Angela had to go through. There's going to be, I'm afraid, and I'm not a law enforcement officer, but if they're purchasing things over the internet and they're making money on it, and I know on the fentanyl, some of the pills were selling for, they bought them for 50 cents and sold them for $50 a piece. And you buy a couple thousand of those, that's a pretty profitable day for those people that are waiting for people to line up outside. So if you're on the opiate thing, get help now. People understand, and you hear it on the news, you hear it everywhere. Angela's got the ball rolling here in the state of South Dakota. The Chief Justice of the state just spoke out on it a couple days ago. Yeah, he wants way more drug court activity and way less incarceration. And like Lyndon said, he's not talking about the dealers on that, the big money makers, but those people that are caught up in the trap. And you can change, and it's so much fun when you get better. At first, it's a tap dance. Boy, I hope I can get through another day, but it does get so much better. So don't be afraid to try to get help and get clean.
For anybody who has any questions for anybody in the panel, Dr. Drieger, Roxy, Peyton, and Taylor will go around the room and find you. Just raise your hand and they will seek you out.
Thank you. This question probably is mostly for Chief Overwig. It was brought to my attention a couple of years ago. A police officer in Frederick, Colorado had told my daughter that they were having an increased amount of people overdosing, and he told my daughter, and I don't know how they knew this, or because the high, they were required to carry Narcan, and the high that these people overdosing were getting from Narcan was so much greater than what they used to overdose, that they were overdosing to be able to have the Narcan.
I've not heard that.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not familiar with that at all.
Yeah, so Narcan is actually what's called an antagonist. So it goes into the receptor and blocks where the opioid would normally attach. It usually would be called a neutral drug from almost every perspective. Actually, the only trouble that I know that we're having with Narcan is some of these synthetic opioids that are coming into contact with is normal doses of Narcan are ineffective, so they're having to, about the only side effect or issue with Narcan we run into is in some of these areas where they've had the synthetic opioids, they have to pump so much into the body, it begins to cause unexpected side effects like pulmonary edema. But I've never heard of it being abused. I've actually had discussions among other addictionologists and among my medical colleagues. One of our concerns has been that kids might keep Narcan around, take a drug, and then think they've got a safe way out. So yeah, I think it is important that we educate when we distribute this that this is a safety net, but it has a half-life. In other words, it can wear off, and it can wear off quicker than the drug in your system can. So you could give a dose, and with minutes to an hour, depending on how potent the drug is in the system, that person could be right back at death's doorstep and at risk of death. So whenever we distribute this, we do indicate that you give this, but then you need to call 911 and, you know, you need to get an emergency response if you had to utilize this drug.
The mass overdose that happened in California yesterday, if any of you heard about that, I think it was 14 people and one person died. Narcan was administered and saved. So obviously it saved a lot of lives. A couple police officers were also feeling sick and were hospitalized after that. But one thing I've heard is that after someone is saved from the overdose from Narcan, they're at the lowest. They've never wanted to get high more than when they're coming out of that, because they get so low. So I think that it's so important that we not just let people walk out of the emergency room doors, you know, if they've overdosed, and I think that does happen. But we have to get them treatment. Some communities have started peer counseling where they go into the emergency rooms to counsel people who've overdosed and been saved by Narcan. Because if we just save someone by Narcan, they're gonna want that high more than ever.
And along with that, you might say, well, I don't want my loved one or my friend to get arrested. I don't know how many of you know it. In 2017, the South Dakota legislature passed an immunity law that if you report somebody who's had a drug overdose, you stay on scene and they truly had an overdose, they're immune from charges, okay? Or if you yourself are having an overdose and need help, there's immunity on that too. Now, granted, that one you only get once. You get one immunity, but...
But they're not keeping a record of that? I did a story on it.
I don't know.
No, they're
I don't know
not.
if they are or not.
No, they're not.
Okay.
They're not keeping a record
Okay.
of it. It's only supposed to be once, but there's no database, because I did it, that was the story I was working on, the Good Samaritan law on the day that Emily died, and then I actually picked that story up, which was really hard for me to go back in time and pick that story up and finish it when I got back to work, but
Yeah, I don't know how they'd know.
they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know.
That's the one.
But it's important for you to know.
Yeah.
Call in, get them help, call law enforcement, call EMS. There is immunity there. Don't worry about the charge.
My name is Lucy Margallo. I'm a general internist. Chief Overbig, thank you very much. Dr. Stanley, good friend, and Joel, and Angela. You lose an angel, but I'm sure you're going to save 1,000 more angels. Thank you so much. Yes, indeed, there's an epidemic. And overprescription was mentioned a couple of times. So I'm going to limit myself as a physician to overprescription. What are we doing about it? Yes, we are. The South Dakota State Medical Association, American Medical Association, a very medical group. In fact, I'm proud to announce that we have achieved, because of our education, we have achieved about 33% decline in the prescription of opioids, which is really fantastic. The good news, South Dakota is in the bottom of the states. That's the good news. But that doesn't make us immune to this disease. It's awakening. It's awakening. We know it's there. Open our eyes. We are there to help you. Cousin? We're cousins. You see the resemblance? Thank you.
First, I'd like to say my heart goes out to Angela. My sister and I, we have a beloved niece that died. She was addicted to alcohol, and she had an eating disorder. And shortly before she died, she worked with the Cornerstone Rescue Mission. And she was a very lovely person. But I'd also like to ask, are people that have a higher threshold to pain, emotional or physical, are they less likely to become addicted to opiate drugs?
You know, I have to apologize that I don't know the answer to that in terms of, I've not seen a study that would look at threshold to pain, but it's interesting, if you look at some of the risk factors that do put you at higher risk, some of them are actually psychological in nature, and some of them are about your environment. So that's a great question, and I have not heard it put that way, but I think ultimately we're all somewhat, we have to respect our genetics, but it's usually something in the environment that either turns on or off the addictive, kind of our addictive susceptibility. But I just can't directly answer what you just asked.
You know, when you talk about that addictive being turned on or off, that's one thing. I have 3 other children at home, and I really worry, you know, and I told them, I said, and of course, you know, they know what happened to their sister, and they're devastated as well. Of course, this has affected them for the rest of their life, and probably changed their views on some of these things as well. But I said to them, if you try weed or alcohol or whatever it is, and it's the best feeling you've ever had, am I right with this, Joel? Then you better watch out, because you could have that addictive gene. You'd better just be really careful and watch yourself, because to me, that's a sign. I mean, I had to take, I think, a hydrocodone after something, maybe childbirth or something like that. I don't know. Didn't affect me. I mean, but I think it is our chemistry. It's how it affects us individually.
Angela, for people that, many people I know, including my mom, my dad, everybody, there's a lot of people I know that take opioids and go to sleep finally because they've been in pain all day, and they don't want them the next day. The first time I took them, I thought, well, I just had a major knee surgery. Let's go out and play. Let's go party, you know, and that was Vicodin at that point in time. And I thought, well, you know, I like this too much, but the same thing kicked in. I can manage it. I'll be all right with it. And I used to let the pills run out and not fill them again right away. But yes, it was the best feeling I ever had. I felt right where I was supposed to be. And there was nothing that bothered me at that point. So that's very true. If you have that response, that euphoria, that you want to come back again and again, you're not going to get it again, number one. You'll chase it for the rest of your life until you die, which nearly happened to me. It just doesn't come back. It becomes about staying well and maintaining where you think you're supposed to be, and you're not making good decisions at that point because you don't even know what you're thinking anyway. So that was a good point you made. Thank you. Did you mix yours with alcohol at all? What's that? Did you mix yours with alcohol? Yeah, Lyndon asked me if I mixed them with alcohol. You better believe it. Yeah, it intensifies intensifies the effect, but also there's doctors here. I mean, I don't know how lucky I could have been to live through that, because your breathing and everything is affected at that point, drinking through it. But that was a combination of mine. A bottle of a certain alcoholic next to me, and then 3 or 4 pills would get me going in the morning. Most people, that would make them go to sleep for 2 days. For me, it was like, okay, it's time to rock. But then the problem was, I'm ready to do it again at noon. So, yeah, a lot of people do mix them. Yeah.
Dr. Drew, you're up top.
First of all, Angela, I'm a great fan of yours. Joel, I listen to you every day. Lyndon, I try not to have too much to do with you. But I've been clean for about 35 years. So it can be done. But that's not why I got the mic. What a great presentation tonight. But besides that, everything here is aimed for people that are having trouble with addictions. But what can we do to stop the people, younger people, older people, whoever? What's the program for not getting started to start with? Does anybody have an answer for that?
I believe the schools do have programs, but these types of events are very positive. I mean, if you want to hear the effects of it, this is it. And to get it out to our youth, we're hoping each one of you take that home to your children.
Well, I can tell you that I don't think DARE worked at all. Do they even do that in schools anymore? No, it was not effective. I don't think we identify children at a young enough age, and maybe you'll be able to weigh in on that, that could, go down this road. I think we need to start addressing this subject with children younger and younger. And I can tell you one other thing. I've talked to a lot of school kids. You could hear a pin drop when I talk to school kids. I think they see Emily's picture, especially girls, will see the change in her looks that affects kids of that age, I think, a lot more. But I tell them, they've gotten the message about suicide threats. They've gotten that message because I've seen some of my kids' own friends have police called, or if they've threatened to commit suicide over social media or texting or things like that. But I don't think they've gotten the message about letting someone know if one of your friends is using an illegal drug, because they could be playing Russian roulette, and they don't want to be a snitch. They don't want to tell someone. So I'm trying to tell kids that. Go to a trusted adult. Go to somebody. You have to speak up, because you can't be worried about whether that person's mad at you. If they overdose and die, no matter what the illegal drug is that they're getting, that fentanyl can be in it. And so you have to speak up, or you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life. And I think the kids that I've spoken to have heard that. So I do hope that they act on it. But I think we need to get to them younger. We need to have stronger messages. And what we're doing right now is not effective, and we're not doing enough. We're just not.
Yeah, I would add one comment to that. So year after year, NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, surveys to find out what deters adolescents from usage. And so every year, the only real thing that parallels increase or decrease of use is fear of the drug, fear of what the drug will do. So nothing else really parallels that increase of use or decrease of use. So I think one of the most powerful things we can do is talk about how dangerous these drugs are, talk about, the use with the developing brain before the age of maturity. And understand too, we talk about ages of maturity of 17 and 18. Brain is developing into the early 20s, 21, 22. So at any rate, we need to, and some of this I think is on us as a medical community, because I would tell you, and this is probably controversial, but marijuana has some significant negative research in the developing brain. But you do not hear that discussion in most communities at this point in time. But when we're talking about a drug like opioids, where there's clear overdose and death, we have to get that message out. And the problem is social media is a counter message to almost everything positive. My daughter's actually getting her PhD. She's in Maryland. She works part-time for the FDA. And she does research on the dark web for websites out there that are telling kids or people, whoever gets on it, how to use fentanyl to get high. So, we just have to overpower that message. But I would tell you, so fear of the drug, understanding the risks, the reality of the risks, the lives that this has taken, and even if it doesn't take your life, the path it can put you on. We have to have those open and honest conversations. We have to do it early, because one of the other things we typically underestimate is how early kids are getting started using these drugs and how early they are introduced into our school systems. So have that conversation if you have the opportunity.
Up front.
Angela, you brought up that addiction comes in all different walks of life, lower caste, middle class. What does the suffering addict, what can they expect from help to get when they don't have insurance, they don't have expendable incomes, and what's this, to keep them from going back to the streets and then ending up in the justice system and prison before they get the help they need?
Right. Well, I think I'm good friends with Pat Rappel, who's the judge for drug court in Minnehaha County, and it's been really decent numbers in terms of being effective. So, I mean, that's one track to put people on.
How do you get that before you get in trouble?
Yeah, so that's the problem. There's the problem. You got to get in trouble first. But I do think that that's what we're trying to accomplish with Emily's Hope, is to try to make it more affordable for people. Right now I'm partnering with Avera because they're building a new treatment center that'll open in September, which will be a regional treatment center. And I'm hoping to expand the nonprofit to help other treatment centers throughout the nation eventually, and also sober living. I mean, we need more resources. And also, when we talked about parallels of the AIDS epidemic to this opioid epidemic, this opioid epidemic has killed many, many more people than AIDS ever did or will. And we put a lot more monetary resources into it, a lot more as a nation. We just put a fraction of that with this opioid crisis bill that was just passed. So there are a lot of similarities, but you can do more. You know, you can talk to your lawmakers. If they hear from enough of you, I know they'll be influenced by that. But I'd like to see an opioid package in Pierre this legislative session, and I was told that's probably not possible. There's a couple of bills going through, but part of it is, you know, communities coming together, and also forcing insurance companies. A lot of people have insurance, but they'll only pay for so many days. So forcing these insurance companies to really cover this, to really cover it, like they would cover cancer treatment or anything else. That's another big piece too. So, you know, you have state aid for some of the very, you know, some people that really need that, but then you have the middle ground people that don't get the help they need, and we can do better. That's what
I'll
we're trying to
comment
do.
on that too, Angela. I've been in 2 different rehabs, as I mentioned earlier. There's nothing more disheartening than seeing somebody making progress, and they're doing really well, and they make the trip to the financial office because their name gets called, and they're booted out after 2 weeks. It happens all the time, all the time. So you have somebody that's made the transition for whatever reason, got there to rehab, and doesn't get to stay the duration. Because so many things in our society are financial. It's the way it is. But something can be done about that, and hopefully the people that make those decisions, I think their brains are starting to spin in that direction, that they actually want to do something about it rather than talk about it all the time.
There was a woman I was told from a friend of mine that saw, this also, your story and hers really helped me keep going, but saw Emily's story, and she's a mom, you know, but identified with Emily's story. She's addicted to opioids. She checked herself into treatment. Insurance would only pay for 2 weeks. Yeah, and she's still working at it, but that's all she got.
Dr. Drieger up top.
Is marijuana considered a gateway drug?
Yeah, throw me a softball. So it's interesting. It may depend on who you talk to. I would say, from one perspective, yes. I was sharing this before dinner that so I was on a panel earlier this year with Marty Jackley, and I'd be interested to hear what the chief may say as well. But you know, one of the comments that he said in this panel, which was also on opioids and substance use in this state, he said, you know, nearly everyone we end up prosecuting, or nearly everyone who comes across my desk who has methamphetamine or opioid, had, if they didn't start with marijuana, it was one of the earliest things that they abused. So, you know, interpret that as you will. I would also tell you that in my role at a behavioral health hospital, where we take a lot of people that are having a number of issues, but, you know, to say marijuana is prevalent in our society is probably putting a diplomatic spin on it. It's tremendously prevalent out there in the high schools, and so if it is a gateway drug, this is kind of hedging on the answer to that. We're in tremendous trouble because its use is skyrocketing. I do think for most people that go on to abuse substance, and when I said earlier the illicit substance use before the age of 17, that includes, before the age of 13, that includes marijuana as an illicit substance. If you start that early, your risk of having a lifetime addiction, as I said, is in the upper 70s. So In my opinion, it is a drug that, particularly when used in our youth, will lead to experimentation and other drug use.
Okay, I think we have microphones and 3 more hands. We'll go to the back of the room.
First of all, I just want to thank you guys for expanding your knowledge and your hearts to those of us struggling with addiction. It means a lot to have you all here and willing to answer these questions. My father passed away from a fentanyl overdose that was administered by a doctor after a surgery, and he went home and went to sleep and didn't wake up because of it. And you would have thought that it would have scared me straight, but instead I turned to drugs to numb my pain. And I'm in a program now in Mitchell, actually 6 months at Stepping Stones, and it's working wonders for me. But I just wondered if you guys had any suggestions on, from an emotional standpoint, from a recovering standpoint, a legal standpoint, as well as a medical standpoint, what you've seen that's really worked that can help us change our lives.
So you said you've been there for 6 months?
I've been there for 2 months, but it's a 6-month
Six-month program, okay.
Yeah, correct.
All I can do is speak from experience, and that is the kind of time that is needed for us to get better. Now, I have seen people be addicted to anything, you name it, they've been addicted to it. And I have a couple of friends, one of them's here tonight. She went to 30 days of treatment, and she hasn't failed since. And I shouldn't call it failure, we're told not to do that, but that's how I consider it when I do it. But the time thing, and the thing that Lyndon had mentioned earlier, if you look at the wave of the future, I would love to see a day where, I mean, obviously, this is going to take over our state just like it does everywhere else. It's hitting random places like New Hampshire right now. I think they have a contest every month to see who overdoses a month. It's terrible. It's just so unfortunate. But a place where you go and you're not incarcerated, but you are. But all they do there is rehab. You know, whether you like it or not, that's where you belong. And once you get to that point, you know, I think your odds of getting out and being successful are a lot better. And a lot of people don't realize that very few people get it on the first try. I wish that wasn't the case, but it just, you know, and that doesn't mean we can't change the way we're doing it, but I would say that you're on the right course right now, and then continue to stay active in the recovery community, which usually means you got to get rid of old friends and all that stuff. I'm sure you've heard that before. But if you stay active in the recovery community and find someone that is serious about it, and that's all I did, and they pulled me through.
It seems to me like it's very individualized, like what can work for one person may not work for another. Also, I think the medically assisted treatments are super important to consider as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also say that to look at your recovery, and I think, you know, you're probably more qualified to speak to this than I am, but recovery is more than abstinence. You know, you're talking about, it sounds like you've been through an incredibly emotionally painful event and probably still have a lot of turmoil. And as you said, you know, you'd think that, you know, maybe this would have changed things for me. But there is so much in the statement you made, which is why I think I was taken aback to begin with. But, you know, recovery includes being incredibly honest with yourself. It's, you know, it's often, you know, finding supports. You have to jettison people that just don't look after you, don't have the best outcomes at heart for you. You know, you have to change your entire life. So I think that's where embracing the entire recovery program and learning every component of it and being prepared to make tremendous changes and continue to find motivation daily, because it will be a daily battle for months and probably years. And so I think all those are important, but I think the more you surround yourself with the right people, and the more you have to rely on yourself, you have to be very honest with yourself, but it's okay to invite other people into your recovery program. And you have to look at it as a chronic disease management. You have to think beyond today, but what's going to keep me well. I know they say take it day by day, but you really have to develop a chronic medical disease model to manage this. So that includes, you know, if we're talking about any other disease state, we would be talking about, you know, who's going to help me with my medications, who's going to guide me spiritually in my physical health and every other component. So I don't know, but I agree with Angela. I've seen many routes to recovery, but they all involve a great deal of motivation, a high degree of investment, and a lot of support.
Top.
My name is Jerry, and I'm an opiate addict, and I'm just wondering what you would suggest to the people in the community to embrace addicts and reduce the stigma associated with addiction. As we all know, as addicts, we're afraid to reach out due to shame, fear, and guilt. And I'd like to introduce my counselor, Karen, who is helping me as an opiate addict to get through, you know, what Joel had mentioned as those little things that pop up in our head on a day-to-day basis when we least expect them. But how do we get to feel accepted instead of rejected by the community?
That's a great question, Jamie. One of the things I'll say, and I think I said it multiple times tonight, is the stigma that goes with it is the reason that I didn't want anybody to know. Then I didn't want to speak here tonight. And then Angela told me that's the whole reason we're doing this, is to end the stigma. There's two ways that I look at it, and I've brought this up in multiple NA meetings and AA meetings that I've attended. Unless you have this disease, it's really hard to expect somebody else to understand it, because that stigma is still there, and people are saying, well, why did you pick it up in the first place? And you know, if you've never gone through it, if you've never lived that life, you know, how do you explain to somebody, like I just said earlier, well, I've been doing this for years now, but I got to be prepared, because when I wake up tomorrow, my brain might be saying, go get more pills. We can get 30. Let's go get 30 to start with that, then you'll manage it. How do you explain that to somebody that hasn't been there? We crave and we want what's nearly killed us multiple times. So the amount of acceptance that you're going to get just improves with the type of things that Angela is doing. And I've heard it mentioned here tonight by both the doctor and chief that these are normal people, usually very good people who obey the law until the drugs take over. I guess that's the message I would try and send to people. And just the showing of people here tonight is proof to me that people are trying to get educated on it. And hopefully, I don't think the stigma is ever going to completely go away. Not in this country. There's enough things going on, but it's going to drop to the point where you don't have to worry about who knows it and who understands it.
Right.
Right?
I think, you know, I know you got a mama, and I know that your mama loves you, right? No matter what. I mean, that kind of unconditional love, we should all be extending to everybody, right? I was really nervous when I went public with my story. Not nervous, no, I wasn't nervous. Let me rephrase that. I'm used to getting beat up online. People don't like me, they don't like my stories. It's given me a really thick skin. So when I talked about this publicly, I expected a lot of shaming, a lot of public shaming through social media, those kind of things. On the contrary, I would say about 99% of the people were supportive, incredibly supportive of me. So I think some of that stigma and shame is in your own mind. I think you'd be surprised at how many people would actually support you. You just have to take that step out on the ledge, right? And see who's there to catch you, because I think you'll be surprised how many people will be. Now, the 1%, they suck. And I'm using nice words tonight. But one of the moms warned me. She said, yep, after my daughter died of a heroin overdose on Facebook, someone posted under my post about her natural selection. I knew I was going to get that comment.
and I did. But I really don't give a crap what that person thinks, and I know it's not true. And I think the good people out there, they better support you. You come see me if they don't. Okay.
One final question in the back. Oh, I'm sorry.
My question is, how important do you think it is to educate the adults versus kids? In my opinion, we do pretty good at educating our kids and scaring them, but the stigma of the social acceptance of the drinking parties and kids, the phrase "kids will be kids," how do we address that? It seems like in the small towns, the first thing we need to do every time we want to buy a fire truck or something is we either have a street dance or some social event with alcohol, and it's just so socially accepted. What would your ideas be on handling that? And then along those lines, I would challenge everybody to love your children or your addict enough to have an intervention. I said for 25 years that I wouldn't do that to a dog, but I'm sure glad somebody did it for me 32 years ago. Thank you.
As far as the alcohol involvement, unfortunately, it seems like it has come as an acceptance thing, and if you're going to have any event at all, that's where the money is. I mean, if you're going to draw people, that's where it is. I think we have to have strong talks with the children. There has to be enforcement. They can't be overlooked. Underage parties have to be broken up, have to be enforced. And the people that are buying the alcohol for them have to be held accountable. Are we going to get it all? Nope. Is it rampant throughout the United States? Yes, it is. Is it killing a lot of kids, a lot of adults? Yes, it is. But I don't think we give up on it. I don't know if you guys have any more on the alcohol part.
Well, I would just comment that the problem with adolescence is consequences are pretty rare. I mean, the things that drive people to stop are legal issues, loss of loved ones, loss of health, and they just don't stack up very quickly when you're young. So the consequences that normally drive people to abstinence or to kind of appreciate the severity or the reality of substance use or alcohol use, they're pretty limited in adolescence. So I do think it's up to the adults to set the tone and create the discussion, and a lot of it's what occurs, in us as role models, I guess, for part of it. So I would agree with you. I mean, educating children is part of it. Leading by example and role modeling is probably another important part that we can all look at. Having said that, I would say that, I'm a alcohol user, in a social situation, so I guess I can't cast stones too strongly, but I think we do need to teach discernment and teach the ramifications of irresponsible use of virtually anything. I mean, so many things can harm us. So I don't know that there's a simple answer in America to, limiting alcohol use, and there's always going to be a percentage, unfortunately. I guess I'm more, I think prevention is the ultimate gold standard, but I also want to continue to have the discussions and eliminate the stigma about seeking help when you have problems.
Okay, I think this is going to conclude our program for this evening. Special thank you to Fresh Ideas for their catering. They catered a meal for our panelists tonight before this event took place. Also, the Dakota Wesleyan University Physical Plant Marketing and Communications team and Dr. Drieger's Core 101 class, whose students also helped with the months of planning to make this very important event a reality. And especially thank you to our panelists, and certainly Angela and Joel for coming up here and essentially bearing their souls for us. So hopefully we can... As we said at the beginning, if we could just help just one person tonight, I think both of them would say that tonight was certainly a success. Each of our panelists will also be available for a short time after this. If you'd like to come up and ask them any questions or shake their hands or do whatever you'd like to do with them. We also have displayed on our big screens. Not anything. Except Jay did ask me to put out tonight that if there's any women in here who are Washington Redskins fans and they're single, he's your guy. That's true. That's true, isn't it? That happened, yeah. And I told him no. But we do have resources up on our screens up here for if anybody who's looking for any resources to help themselves or a loved one. And also we are taking donations for Emily's Hope out in the lobby. If you would like to give, I know it would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, thank you and have a safe evening.
Oh my gosh, I thought you were gonna like call it off at some point.
Cool.